Elsaessar and all of you to his lecture. It's also my pleasant duty to say a few words about CSDS and its Golden Jubilee. CSDS is an extremely diverse place. We do lots of things over here. You all know that we do cinema studies and we do it exceptionally well. But we also do electoral politics, democratic politics, childhood and education. We deal with mobile and hybrid identities, with post-colonial cities and media experiences, with cultural and intellectual history, with normative theory, with disability studies, studies on the environment, with law and livelihood, and I can just go on and on. But simply living in a diverse place such as CSDS is one thing, but valuing it and seeing it as a source of mutual understanding and mutual nourishment is quite another. And I'm sure all of us at CSDS, the entire faculty, is legitimately proud that we value this diversity and we gain from it every single minute that we are here. There is another wonderful thing about CSDS, and I can tell you that, can tell you something about it through my own experience. I joined the center pretty late. I joined it in 2005 after being part of the university system for more than 25 years. And I was persuaded to join the center by two scholars associated with it, who were widely believed to be and seen to be my principal adversaries in a debate on secularism in India. Now, this is inconceivable elsewhere. Ideological opponents are present in many institutions, but they're neither invited nor welcome. And CSDS is one of those places where I was actually invited, even though a lot of people saw me as one of the ideological opponents of an extremely important major figure in the center. This openness and a conviction that there is virtually no one with whom one must not converse is one of the most endearing qualities about the center. The center is an open, vibrant public space. It values civic engagement and remains connected to the broader politics of civil society and state institutions. But of course, it's not just any other public space. The center has a very distinctive academic character. Our collective self-understanding is that we are a community of researchers committed to shaping significant public and academic debates within India and abroad. Although these days, I don't know if you're familiar with it, we go beyond debates. We're actually participating in public life with a vengeance and shaping public life and political life too. But although many of us do not claim to be public intellectuals, each one of us takes seriously the responsibility to link research to the broader effort of enhancing the quality of collective life, especially in India. We try to nourish research that connects with the past and speaks to the future. We try to set our own agenda, but we do it in equal partnership with institutions all over the world. And we also see ourselves as a vibrant space, a vibrant arena where scholars from all over the world arrive to interact with one another and to interact with us and to generate ideas which hopefully have a long shelf life and which circulate widely. And you can see that the Golden Jubilee lecture series has been a perfect arena for that. We can also take real pride in this Go to Jubilee lecture series. How valued the center is, both nationally and internationally, can be gleaned by the fact that there is not a single person who was invited and who refused to come. And we have a really distinguished list of speakers who have spoken here. I don't know if I'm going to be able to cover everybody, but I will mention some: Sheldon Pollock, Veena Das, Arjuna Padarai, David Shulman, Girish Karnat, the Rudolphs, Barry Flood, Gayatri Spivak Chakravarti, Riku Parekh, Tapti Guha Thakurtha, Garnakuve Sekre, Sudhir Kakkar, Charles Taylor, Nilofer Gole, Jose Casanova, Craig Kaloon, and now Thomas Elsaesser. So it's a real pleasure that all of you are here to listen to him. Institutions in India often fail to retain the fundamental vision that first animated them. They begin to flounder with the departure of their founders. They neither die nor survive, existing endlessly in limbo. It is thus a remarkable achievement that CSDS continues to live with profound purpose in its 50th year. I don't think I have any more to say. I now invite Ravi Vasudevan, who's done such a wonderful job of organizing this seminar, putting all this together with all of us and many of our colleagues here. He will introduce Professor Elsaessar, and then Professor Elsaessar will deliver the lecture.
Thank you, Rajiv. It's great to have you here today, because unfortunately he couldn't be here at the beginning of the film conference, and I knew he did regret it. So it's great to have you here today. And well, it's an honor to welcome Thomas Elsaesser. This is after a decade. I think he was here about 10 years ago, when Sarai was still reasonably early. That is Sarai, the program of the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, our media research program. And well, I suppose a lot has happened in between, but I remember Thomas was talking about the digital on that occasion, and he's talking about the digital again, I think, today, although we will be clearer as the evening progresses, perhaps. I will not say very much, and he urged me not to say very much, but it's difficult not to say something. And I do recall that when, perhaps it was his first book, called The New German Cinema, written in 1989, came out, there was a reviewer who said, well, now there is no need to write anything more on the New German Cinema. I think that's it. Everyone can kind of close shop, because everything possible that could be said has been said in this book. And that first book, I suppose that came relatively late and should give hope to some of us, because there's been a flood of books in the last 20 odd years, 25 years. There's been a flood of books and a ton of volumes. And I will just remember a few of them, which made a terrific impact on me. And to note that these books would be actually there at critical moments in the development of the field. In a sense, Thomas comes from the point before he starts working and thinking about film, before film studies is institutionalized, and he was responsible for institutionalizing it in new spaces, as in Amsterdam, where he has been for many years and is still in Amsterdam, where he set up a major department. But from the earlier period, this is a period of the exciting 60s, I think, where there were kind of film magazines and what we would call little magazines, and they were proliferating in terms of intellectual film culture before the actual academic institutionalization. And I remember it was Monogram, if I remember correctly, probably a name which is also taken from the French New Wave at some point. It resonates with it. But there are some very important essays which have actually recently been collated in a book as late as, I think, 2012 on the persistence of Hollywood. So the stuff which is written in the 60s actually is still being kind of put together now and has a kind of address and a validity after a very long time. The early cinema as a kind of a key moment in the actual shift in the nature of film studies, the study of film history, Thomas contributed a key volume in 1991. And there's a complete reconfiguration of the understanding of what film was, when it emerged, and how to kind of break up a certain type of linear understanding of its emergence and transformation. And I will then not go into any much greater detail, and just remember a couple of things. A proliferation of books on Germany, from Weimar to key figures such as Fassbinder, Harun Foroki, and some of these were actually, I still remember, making an impact on me in terms of, for example, the work on Fassbinder, which I think captured the tortured sense and the great difficulty of thinking through how to use cinema, how to actually engage with complex issues of nationality, history, sexuality, which Fassbinder kind of encodes, embodies in some crucial way. It was a particularly moving kind of collection of essays, of a book which came out, I think, in the mid-1990s. There has been subsequently extremely important work on the digital moment and digital transformation and what it has heralded, and a continuing work on Germany, most recently a book on terror and trauma, which has just come out. There was a very, I think, has been a very influential book just in the recent past, with which I'll end, because it, I think, maps that kind of register of the dynamic in Thomas's intellectual engagement and personality, an introduction to film theory through the senses, which I think is a remarkably lucid kind of statement about the current state of play, in terms of thinking about the range of registers, affects, feelings, sensations which cinema offers us, and which, in a sense, we hope to always renew a compact with. Thomas. Cinema after film on the future of, is it longer? Of obsolescence.
Thank you very much, Ravi, for your generous introduction. I feel extremely honored to have been asked to present one of the Jubilee lectures, and I also feel very humble in speaking to this particular audience and in the context of the many lives of Indian cinema, because, as Ravi said, I may have covered a number of fields, but I certainly would not claim any kind of expertise on Indian cinema, except, of course, through Ravi, when he was working with me in the late 80s. And it is in some sense not only to honor the 50 years of the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, but also my personal homage to Ravi and Vasudevan and the enormous and fruitful work that he has done, not only on behalf of Indian cinema, but on behalf of, I would say, the cinema in a global context. So, those are my preliminary words. I want to now continue with a little anecdote, which has to do with my getting a visa to come to this wonderful country. I made the mistake of applying for a conference visa as opposed to a tourist visa, because when I first tried to enroll for a tourist visa, I was told that I would have to sign a declaration that would explicitly prohibit me from engaging in any kind of professional work, either paid or unpaid. And since I knew I was going to give a lecture, I thought, well, I'm not going to perjure myself straight away. So I persisted with the conference visa application and received, after several days, a call from the embassy, a lady from the embassy in The Hague. And she said, well, would you be so kind as to tell us exactly what this conference is about? And I said, I believe it's about centenary of Indian cinema. And then she said, well, if you're just attending it, that wouldn't allow us to give you a conference visa. Are you giving a paper? And I said, yes, I'm actually giving a paper. And she said, what is the title of your paper? So I said, Cinema After Film. And there was a pause at the other end. And then she said, but sir, this doesn't make sense. are you sure they're going to understand what you're going to tell them? So I want to begin with actually, I was too flummoxed to actually give her a proper answer, although I tried to. I thought I'd honor this very sharp and intelligent lady's doubt by giving you a sense of what I think this is going to be about. And I will, as it were, summarize my lecture in a couple of sentences. And actually I will say it in one sentence, and the one sentence is, cinema after film is cinema before film. And I'll let you ponder this a little while, and then maybe during the course of my talk it'll be clearer. But I'll give you three reasons why I think cinema after film is also cinema before film. First of all, mainstream cinema, as you know, Hollywood, has been experimenting with new kinds of spaces, cinematic spaces, spatial imaging and so on, and we've all been witness to the new 3D revolution. But of course, as many of us, most of us film scholars know, stereoscopy was actually preceding the cinema as one of the most important modes of imaging in the 19th century. So by having a return to 3D, we're actually also having cinema before film. Also, the experience cinema that we are now accustomed to valorizes, I believe, once more, and in a particular intense way, a cinema, Ravi has already indicated, a cinema alongside and even beyond storytelling. We have a cinema of special effects, we have a cinema that is particularly interested in affects, it's particularly interested in the body and the senses. It's the cinema that we sometimes also call a cinema of attraction. And that too gets us back to the very beginning and even the prehistory of the cinema. And storytelling has entered one of its most enterprising and experimental phases for many, many decades. Not only because of the pressure from video games and interactive forms of storytelling, but also from the way in which, again, also mainstream cinema has opened up narratives. We talk about network narratives, we talk about fractal narratives, I talk about mind game films, I talk about forking path narratives, complex narratives, and so on. A whole plethora of terms has been generated by film scholars to understand the permutations and transformations that narrative is undergoing. And that, of course, also, for those of us interested in early cinema and the very, very first decades of cinema, takes us back to that initial period. So, in those senses, cinema after film is cinema before film. But my talk tonight will not actually touch on any of these areas, but actually try and give some substance to this somewhat provocative or incomprehensible title by speaking about another area where I think we can legitimately see the old and the new coming into a very different configuration and combination, and that is the moving image as it has entered the museum and the art space. So this is what I will be concentrating on. One of the striking phenomena in the world of cinema over the past 20 years is the extent to which the moving image has taken over or has been taken over by museums, by galleries, and art spaces in general. There are many good and not so good reasons for this dramatically increased visibility in the contemporary art scene of screen and projection of motion and sound. Some reasons are internal to the development of modern art practice, if one accepts that for many of today's artists, a digital camera and a computer are as much primary tools of their artistic trade as a paintbrush or a canvas were 100 years ago. Other reasons for such a rapprochement, if that's what it is, are more internal to the cinema. For instance, not least are we seeing yet another round in the much trumpeted, that is, much lamented, but also much ridiculed death of cinema. whether in the 1960s attributed to television, in the 70s to the video recorder, in the 80s to the end of European auteur cinema, in the 90s to digitization, and in our own century to downloads or mobile devices. And I want to just show you a little clip of how this death of cinema debate presents itself. You'll have to excuse me manipulating my various devices.
Now, if you're playing the movie on a telephone, you will never in a trillion years experience the film. You'll think you have experienced it, but you will be cheated. It's such a sadness that you think you've seen a film on your fucking telephone. Get real.
There you go, get real. David Lynch, I'm sure you all recognized him. But of course the thing that is supposed to make us stand up or sit up is that it's advertising for the iPhone. What I sometimes call a contradiction, a self-contradiction, a performative self-contradiction. But as the periodic repeat performances of the death of cinema suggest, there's also something else at stake when today we note the presence of the moving image in the museum. Let me put it as an either-or question before arguing for another approach. The merger of the moving image and the museum, is it a takeover bid or a marriage of convenience? And if it is a takeover bid, who is taking over whom? And is it a friendly or a hostile takeover bid? I've met many a curator and art historian in recent years who has said to me, "You film people, you really screwed up." Who, among those who matter in the arts, in public life, actually takes the cinema seriously? You have had 100 years to make the case for the cinema as an art form, and you failed miserably. Now get out of the way and let us handle the matter. To which I usually reply, for these same 100 years, the cinema has been the elephant in the room of modern art and modern literature. Its presence was hardly ever acknowledged, even though every artist was acutely aware of its existence, as an aesthetic as well as an economic force. And now you art historians are starting to panic, because you realize that the real art of the 20th century was the cinema. And you better start rewriting your histories of modernism to take account of this fact. If the merger then is a marriage of convenience and out of, as it were, mutual necessity, who benefits most? Is it the cinema, insofar as the museum, I'm talking about a contemporary art museum, is quite good at generating and managing cultural capital, even for a commodity, in this case old movies, that ostensibly has lost its primary commercial value. And true enough, there is a new kind of cinephilia emerging, and it's still growing, that embraces the history of the movies, even more in the form of cinema history than as film history. On the other hand, is it the museum that's the primary beneficiary of the merger? As art exhibitions increasingly rely on the blockbuster formula, for which they need big screens and moving images, as well as the marketing savvy of Hollywood, what one notes is a tendency of trying to bring to life its traditional objects and artifacts, be they paintings, drawings, and sculpture. And it seems to me that the remarkable rise of an artist whom I highly value, like William Kentridge, is a perfect synthesis of the art of drawing, the history of animation, and of auteurist movie making. He is, I would say, the genial Fellini from Johannesburg, with the protean inventiveness of a Pablo Picasso. And I just want to show you a little clip from a film that he made about his method.
There's a sense of animation as a field of transformation, of depicting transformation. That's always been at the heart of it, that continues today. Charcoal is very fortuitous material to be working with for animation because its tonal range kind of is very good for photographic film, but also because of the speed of its transformability. It's very easy to erase. So you can kind of change it as quickly as you can think. And I suppose it became a way of thinking rather than a physical medium for me. Films are made without a script or a storyboard. So there are one or two key images that I know at the beginning of the film, and I'd start with drawing those. And literally it's on day one when I say I want to make a film, usually by the end of the first day or the end of the second day, there's film that's gone through the camera. But a drawing is done on a sheet of paper, that's on the wall of the studio, and halfway across the studio is the camera, say 4 paces away. And I'll draw the first image of the scene and shoot 2 frames with the camera. Then walk back across the studio to the drawing. And on the same sheet of paper on the drawing, not make a whole new drawing, but just erase, for example, the top crest of the wave and change the shape of the white line minutely. Maybe add some more charcoal below. Walk back to the camera and shoot 2 more frames. And then walk back to the drawing and maybe make that white line fatter so that in fact the foam is getting thicker on the top of the crest of the wave. Maybe it's getting darker underneath, add more charcoal there. Walk back to the camera and shoot 2 more frames. I've now shot 6 frames. That sequence would continue with the walk between the camera and the drawing. If it's 4 seconds long, that's 100 frames, 50 words. If it's 20 seconds long, that's so much longer. So there are sometimes many hundreds of alterations on one sheet of paper. And the sheet of paper that is left is the last frame, not of the film, but of that sequence in the film, of that shot. I'm not seeing what's been shot, I have to take it on trust what is there. All that you see at each moment is the present. In other words, the state of the drawing at that moment. And it's very much in the belief that in that physical walk between the drawing and the camera, in that physical process, it's not a mental process, it's a physical process, new images and ideas suggest themselves to go before that shot, after that shot, what that shot can develop into.
William Kentridge is one of the most successful, prominent, and loved artists of the 21st century. But as you can see, he's very much somebody from the time of the very early part of cinema. He's reinventing chronophotography. He's also reinventing animation. Horace McKay might have spoken the same way. He's given us, Kentridge has given us a wonderful homage to Georges Méliès. And so he would be one of my examples of an active artist right now working with cinema after film, but very, very much also in the mode of cinema before film. But museums are also monetizing their more classical assets by using in their promotional videos the techniques of film and the techniques of advertising, letting the camera touch a painting, isolating telling details, and highlighting individual gestures or fabrics or textures. In short, the videos, the posters and postcards produced for a Manet retrospective or a Max Liebermann exhibition deploy eminently cinematic techniques of montage and close-up to simulate the ride of colors or the drama of movement and action, as if a Rubens, a Tintoretto, but even the quiet Vermeer or the contemplative Rembrandt had always wanted to make movies and just didn't have the tools to do it. A recent feature film by Jem Cohen called Museum Hours, I haven't seen it, weaves a human interest story into these exploratory pans and close-ups across the surface of master paintings, fastening on detail and personal anecdote. The film is described on the web as follows. One of the preeminent moving image artists working today, Jem Cohen, has long blurred the line between the gallery and the cinema, so it's only fitting that his uniquely pleasurable new documentary fiction hybrid should do the same. Set largely within the Kunsthistorische Art Museum of Vienna, Museum Hours focuses on Johann, a museum guard, and Anne, a visitor to his country. And again, I'll take the liberty of showing you the trailer.
It's already my 6th year working in the museum. It In my younger days, I worked in the music business, though it didn't seem so much of a business to us at the time. But I had my share of loud, so now I have my share of quiet. When it's quiet or one tires of looking only at visitors, one can turn an eye to the paintings and you will always see something new.
I've only been to Europe once, a long time ago. My cousin is ill in the hospital. There's no close family left in Down. I haven't seen her in a long, long time. It's just really hard to figure out what to do.
Welcome to Vienna.
Thanks.
Doctor says she's steady, quite steady, but nothing really is better. But also nothing is worse.
Freelance, what do they call that here? But I also work at a little bar just to make money. That's another friend who owns a club. So I'm friend employed actually, not self-employed.
On reflection, however, matters are not at all straightforward when a moving image enters the museum. Different actor agents, different power relations and policy agendas, different competences, different egos and sensibilities are at work and make up the complex puzzle that is the contemporary art world and its commercial counterpart, the art market, as cinema and contemporary art take on each other. From a historical point of view, the museum and the motion picture palace are in fact antagonists, each with its own institutional pedigree, and during the past century, each has often enough been contemptuous of the other, one calling the other elitist and snobbish, to which the other replied with vulgar and facile. Shifting from the institutional barriers and the mutual name-calling to the aesthetic register, the contrast is equally sharp. However snugly a blank box can be fitted into the white cube with just a few mobile walls and plenty of dark fabric, the museum is no cinema and the cinema is no museum. First of all, because of the different economies of temporal vectors, which oblige even the most dedicated museum visitor to sample a film and to constantly adjust his or her attention span, oscillating between concentration and distraction. When going to the movies, by contrast, I know in advance that I'm committing a two-hour plus segment of my time, indeed my life, and I deliciously submit to the relentless forward thrust and irreversibility of the moving image on the screen. The bodily differences are also crucial. Upright and peripatetic in the art space, supine and immobile in the cinema. Given these incompatibilities and even antagonisms, the forces that have brought these two together must have been quite powerful. To single out a few of these vectors, the dilemma of contending public spheres having to come to terms with each other, for instance, can be observed quite vividly in the fate of often politically committed filmmakers from the avant-garde in the 60s and 1970s. Since the 1980s, their films could no longer count on screening, I'm talking about Europe, could no longer count on screenings in art houses, at film clubs, or even hope to find a niche on late-night television arts programs. As finance from television and the state subsidies began to dry up, some filmmakers found a livelihood as teachers in art academies, while others embraced a second life as installation artists. Commissioned to create work by curators of international art shows, like the Casa Documenta, they found both fresh funding and a new audience. Especially after Catherine David in 1997 invited filmmakers from France, Germany, Belgium and Britain to the Documenta 10, which she curated. And among them were Harun Farocki, Sally Potter, Chantal Ackermann, Ulrike Oettinger, as well as Hans-Jürgen Sieberberg and Jean-Luc Godard. Since then, the crossover has continued at the Venice Biennale, the Whitney Biennial, at Carnegie Mellon, at Oxford Modern Museum, at the Tate Modern, in Berlin, in Sao Paulo, Madrid, and many, many other venues. These filmmakers turned installation artists are now named side by side with the reverse, namely with artists turned filmmakers, such as Bill Viola, Fischli Weiss, Johan Grimonpré, Matthew Barney, Tacita Dean, Pippi Lottie-Rist, Douglas Gordon, Sam Taylor-Wood, Isaac Julian, or Steve McQueen. Such antagonistic cooperation is not altogether new, let's not forget that the historical avant-gardes have always combated the art world, while nevertheless crucially depending on its institutional networks and its financial support. Biting the hand that feeds you is the time-honored art practice, even before Dada made it official doctrine. It is a constitutive contradiction that also informs the new alliance between the film avant-garde and the museum circuit. And furthermore, film works, whether analog or digital, create legal deadlocks around what is an original, which exacerbates the old conflict that already arose when photography was admitted to the art canon some 50 or 60 years ago. So how does a video installation create the necessary scarcity, scarcity being a necessity for the art world, how does a video installation create the necessary scarcity in a digital medium that delivers the perfect copy? Film, as the epitome of mechanical reproduction, now finds itself taken in charge by the very institution dedicated to the culture of the unique object, whose status as original is both its aesthetic aura and its working capital. Thirdly, as already indicated, several problematic, but I would maintain also possibly productive tensions arise between the temporal extension of a film work in a gallery space, often several hours long. Think of Jean-Luc Godard's 260 minutes Histoire du cinéma, Douglas Gordon's 24-hour cycle, Ulrike Oettinger's 363 minutes Southeast Passage, Phil Collins' 2-hour Return of the Reel, to name just a few. These works openly and explicitly challenge the exhibition visitor's own time economy, which is rarely more than a few minutes in front of an installation, and maybe a bit longer inside a black box. The mismatch creates its own aesthetics. For instance, how do I, as viewer, when confronted with such overlong works, manage my anxiety of missing the key moment? And how do I balance this anxious anticipation against my sense of surfeit and saturation as the minutes tick away before a video that has no narrative and scarcely any movement before it comes possibly to a close? With installation pieces comprising several monitors assembled in a room, another creative challenge arises. Images and events that appear to my eyes as contiguous in space may have to be read as successive in time, or vice versa. Their succession has to be retroactively reconstructed as spatially distinct. In either case, there is no longer a norm by which I might measure the deviation, forcing a radical reconsideration of the relation between fragment and totality, so crucial to Western classical aesthetics, as well as challenging any notion of spatial capture or closure, even though the black box might in other respects mimic the darkened movie theatre. As one critic put it, why is it that whenever I come across Douglas Gordon's 24-hour cycle, all I ever get is some dull stop-go, slow-mo frames from the car purchase scene, or a man taking 10 minutes to walk jerkily around a desk? I've never yet, in the 9 years this work has been doing the international rounds, seen the shower scene. That's my luck, or rather, lack of it. So let me show you a brief extract from precisely 24-hour Psycho, so that you get a sense of, those of you who don't know it, as I'm sure you will agree, a very interesting piece. I have to move it forward a little bit. You see how it refocuses our attention in so many different ways, and here you have an almost abstract painting. In fact, now that I've shown you the William Kentridge, it could be a charcoal drawing. I'll stop it here, but let me tell you, if ever you have a chance to see it. And of course, you can never see it as a whole because no museum is open for 24 hours. Some of these extended works, in confronting viewers with their own temporality and thus with their own mortality, are no doubt also a filmmaker's way of actively resisting the quick glance and the rapid appropriation by the casual museum visitor. Regret like missing the shower scene, or a bad conscience for slipping away after a minute or two in a 3-hour video, have to be part of an artist's calculation. It may be his sole consolation or her sly revenge. At the other end of the spectrum, artists also create time-based art that accommodates such random attention and impatient selectivity. They rely on montage, on juxtaposition and the rapid cut. Or they develop new forms of the short film, again, and practice from early cinema, or the compilation, the sampler, the loop, and other iterative or serial modes. In the film work, for instance, of Matthias Müller, Omar Faust, Shirin Neshat, or Martin Arnold, it is repetition and looping, as well as stretching and slowing down, as we just saw here, that takes over from linear narrative or argumentative trajectories as the structuring principles of the moving image. And again, I allow myself to show you something, this time from Martin Arnold. This piece is called Life Wastes Andy Hardy. And you'll recognize Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland. This piece is quite typical for the 1980s. It still contains traces of the old hostility of the avant-garde towards Hollywood. And Arnold's brutal manipulation of filmic materiality teeters between the fascination with Hollywood magic and disgust at its sentimentality, between acknowledging the precise craftsmanship of those working in Hollywood and a sort of natural aggression to the medium itself, but also to the viewer. By the late 1990s, period that I'm mainly concerned with, or one of the periods, such found footage compilations or such manipulations of the material more interestingly bring out different forms of cinematic unconscious. And I'm thinking in particular of the work of Matthias Müller in compilations such as Home Stories and their work on Hitchcock's films called The Phoenix Tapes. Unfortunately, I don't have an example that I can show you, but there you see a very sophisticated way of bringing together what might, on the one hand, look like Hitchcock's own unconscious. For instance, there's one that I was working on for another project called Why Don't You Love Me? where we have all the overprotective mothers in Hitchcock's films, and of course their sons are virtually all psychopaths and mass murderers. So that particular way of working with Hollywood material has, I think, changed to some extent over a decade or so. But the change in attitude to Hollywood movies alerts us to another aspect of the alliance of filmmakers and art spaces. One of the more subtle forces at work in bringing museum and moving image together is the programmatic reflexivity of the museum, the recursiveness of the modern artwork, and the increasing self-reference of the cinema regarding its own history. Entering a museum or a gallery is still to cross a special kind of threshold of seeing objects not only in their material specificity and physical presence, but also to understand this there-ness as a special kind of statement, as both a question and a provocation, which has often been discussed under the heading of an artwork's autonomy and self-sufficiency, or more paradoxically, it was invoked in Walter Benjamin's notion of the aura, which connotes a distance, however close you get. This production of presence of classical art, both reinforced and deconstructed by modernist art, think Marcel Duchamp's Urinal, is challenged and subverted by moving image installations, not just by the crucial introduction of sound, but also by different modes of performativity, of display and self-display inherent in the cinema. Precursors of such performativity are the minimalist artists in New York of the 1960s, often involving the body of the artist. Think Carolee Schneemann, Joan Jonas and Yvonne Rainer, as well as video art in general, even to the point of self-injury, think early Marina Abramović. And these create very different kinds of interfaces between the work and the viewer, performative interfaces, I would say. And in this perspective, famous polemical art historical essays such as Michael Fried's Art and Objecthood or Rosalind Krauss's video, The Aesthetics of Narcissism, can actually be reread today as early warning systems of the imminent invasion of the art space by the moving image. Yet installations have also successfully explored ways of engaging the spectator other than those of either classical cinema or the traditional museum. For instance, the creation of soundscapes that convey their own kind of presence. I'm here thinking of Janet Cardiff and George Burish-Miller's audio walks, or the diptychs or triptych compositions that provoke the viewer into closing the gap by providing his or her own missing link of montage. Bill Viola, Isaac Julian, Sam Douglas and Chantal Ackermann also use this very classical form of the triptych or the diptych. Or think of work made palpable, making palpable an absence as a presence, as in many of Christian Boltanski's installations. Each work proposes modes of attention that are as much a challenge to the contemplative, disinterested museum viewing as they're uncounter to the cinematic forms of spectatorship, if we think of specularity, voyeurism and immersion as typical of the cinema. And one of the most intriguing examples of the disassemblance, reassemblage of the cinema spectator is Omar Faust's The Castings. Here I want to show you the artist explaining some of his thoughts about this piece.
I was thinking to myself, come on, you have to see the burning vehicle, you have to see the American shooting, you have to see me pointing my weapon at you, stop. But he didn't stop, so I remember leaning over, I'm like, how fast are we going? And she just kind of laughed and said, you don't know anything about love. Did you know that?
My name is Omar Fast, and I'm talking about my piece, The Casting. When a viewer walks into the room, what he or she immediately sees are two screens hanging from the ceiling. There are 4 simultaneous projections. On the front side of the 2 screens, you see stories that are enacted by actors who are standing still. On the back of the 2 screens, you see 2 heads. One of them is a young man who is a sergeant in the US Army who is telling a story. And the other head is my head. A viewer coming in will always see the front side with the actors. And so that suspends his or her figuring out how the piece is constructed until they make a turn around the screens and see the back of the screens.
And they don't speak a lick of English. So now I'm like, wow, they're just staring at me, they don't understand a word I'm saying. They're talking to me, and I don't understand a word they're saying. It's just really uncomfortable, and it's night, and there's not a whole lot of lights because they don't want us to know that the people who make the decisions don't want anybody to know that we're there, so everything's done under cover of darkness.
I use the interview almost as a pool of words from which to edit new sentences and new thoughts that were not said in the interview, both on my part and on my storyteller's part. I met with a group of soldiers, young men who had just returned from Iraq. Out of these interviews, I chose one particular person's stories. One of them takes place on a road in Iraq, and the other one takes place on a road in Germany. And that gave me the idea to sort of start cutting between them.
But I had met a German girl, beautiful redheaded German girl, and I didn't know that she was completely, absolutely insane. She would stand on the side of the road and watch us we drive past and blow us kisses and stuff, give us a thumbs up. But you know, she was blowing kisses at us so fast, and like she was just slapping herself in the face. It was actually pretty funny, but it was sweet at the same time.
Someone in recalling a memory and telling a story is obviously being a storyteller. There's 1,000 decisions that are made about what's remembered. A lot of those decisions are not conscious, of course, but many of those decisions are obviously conscious. And the eyewitness account, the thing that we prize so much in our media, it brings that into the storytelling as part of the piece itself.
The museum space here has the advantage of taking key elements of the cinema, such as projection, animation, montage, the close-up, narrative, repetition, progression, and articulate them across new kinds of tensions and self-contradictions, conducting a general interrogation of what constitutes an image, what constitutes a narrative, and what is its viewer. You see what he intercut these two stories, also, if you like, it's a form of diptych as well, but within reverse screens, and it's a very disconcerting but very powerful piece. Fast piece, however, inscribes itself very much in a tradition, that of the early work by Bill Viola, such as He Weeps for Me. This is one shot out of it. That's another one. Dan Graham's time delay pieces. Michael Snow's installation, Two Sides to Every Story, and Andy Warhol's Inner Space, Outer and Inner Space. I won't have time to discuss them in detail, but the most important one amongst these is probably Anthony McCall's line describing a cone. All these works are from the late 60s and early 70s, and they have become unassailably canonical since the 1990s. And again, I want to show you or remind you of line describing a cone, because there's probably nobody here who hasn't actually heard about it or may even have seen it.
I call them solid light pieces primarily because there is this paradox. When you first encounter the works, you see something made of veils of light that looks quite stable, solid, and almost like it's a thing. And something that almost everybody does, even people who've been to them repeatedly, everybody does is to reach up with their hand and touch to feel the plane of light. So paradoxically, it's quite tactile. Even, of course, your touch reveals that there's nothing there. Nonetheless, your imagination insists that there is something that's quite solid and quite palpable. These solid light projections do have these two faces. They exist as a sculptural form, a three-dimensional volumetric object, which you can walk around, go into and explore. But when you turn around, you also see that that volumetric form derives from a two-dimensional drawing. And one thing I discovered very early on is that if you project onto a wall drawings, like a movie, an animated movie, you can have very, very complex forms interacting with one another and superimposed on one another, and we have no difficulty deciphering what we're looking at. But if you were to project one of those animations as a solid light piece, you would find that the three-dimensional spaces created by those intersecting lines is too complex for the eyes and the body to decipher. So they become incomprehensible. And I found from very early on that very simple lines made the most interesting three-dimensional objects. In the 70s, all my solid light works were horizontal. This was, of course, normal because they were working, it came out of cinema. Film projectors were designed to sit flat on tables and produce horizontal images on the wall. But when I began working again in the beginning of 2001 or 2 or something like that, of course I was working with a new kinds of projectors, digital projectors, and I quickly realized that they were not gravity bound like a film projector. And I began to explore vertical projections and became increasingly interested by the way in which they aligned themselves much more with a sculptural tradition than with a cinematic tradition, because they, one began to think of them as vertical figures, standing figures, not in a pictorial sense, but they remind you of the verticality of sculpted bodies.
Now, Anthony McCall here relates his work, or the reprise of his work, very much to various sculptural traditions, but I would argue that it is a prime example of what I have called cinema after film, also being cinema before film, because if you see this line describing a cone and the way that we interact with it within a different traditions, you would call it a phantasmagoria. And phantasmagoria is one of the most powerfully and also powerfully suppressed traditions that led into contemporary cinema. So that's why I would claim Anthony McCall as part of the particular lineage that I'm trying to show to you. This return to the early 1970s as a reference point for installation art in general, and especially the role of McCall's line describing a cone, is symptomatic also in another way, because the same period saw the elaboration of what is still one of the most intellectually sophisticated but also contested and controversial theories of the cinema, known in English as apparatus theory. I need not go into detail about the theory's constituent elements, with its purported analogy with Plato's, the allegory of Plato's cave, or its analogy to Freud's topography of the psyche, but nonetheless remind you of its enormous impact on not only film theory in general, but feminist film theory in particular. Nor shall I rehearse the reasons why apparatus theory fell into disrepute in the late 80s, given that its philosophical underpinnings relied on Saussurean linguistics, Lacanian psychoanalysis, and Althusserian Marxism, each disowned, disproved, or discarded since by the academic mainstream and attacked in cinema studies by the unlikely alliance of Anglo-American cognitivists and continental Deleuzians. Historically important, however, is the contemporaneity of apparatus theory with avant-garde works just cited. They are the rector to the verso of the theory. They are both its complement and its refutation. For while many of these works were at the time read as exemplifying a critique of illusionist cinema and of deconstructing the apparatus, we can now, with hindsight, see that they also did nothing of the kind, but merely proved that apparatus theory may have been the funeral of a practice rather than its conceptual support. Funeral of a practice in two senses. All of the artists using the new handheld cameras or camcorders in the 70s to produce cinematic works belonged to what came to be known as expanded cinema, i.e. ways of using the cinematic apparatus to insist on the materiality of film, on the interaction of heterogeneous technologies, but also on the presence of the body and on the performativity of the camera itself, elements now very much also present in the digital media. They wanted to make movies without a frame or a horizon line, without imaginary depth or even forward upright orientation. You've just heard Anthony McCall arguing that way. In other words, expanded cinema broke with the very constraints that purportedly ensured the cinema effect of classical cinema. Illusionism, subjectivity as miscognition, or narrative and the ideology of realism. But funeral of a practice also in another sense. By the time Jean-Luc Baudry and others began formulating this apparatus theory, mainstream cinema too had already left the theatre as a simulacrum of Plato's cave. People had begun to watch movies on their television screens, in ambient light and with plenty of distraction, and they learned via the video recorder to take charge of the remote control, to fast forward or to freeze frame. Laura Mulvey, one of the pioneers and pillars of apparatus theory, took an entire book to belatedly marvel at the empowered spectatorship that the pause button brought to her movie experience. In other words, at the very moment when this potent theory of classical cinema was developed and spread like wildfire amongst film theorists, its very object of study had either left the darkened womb-like cave in favor of the living room, or had transformed the movie theater itself with Dolby sound, turning it into a stereoscopic and stereophonic inner space as outer space and outer space as inner space, with movies like Star Wars and Apocalypse Now or Nashville and The Conversation. In the garden now the legacy of the 1970s film avant-garde. And secondly, how have academics, film historians, film theorists and art historians answered the challenge of the altered experience of contemporary cinema and prepared the cinema's past for a new future? Both responses fall under what I shall now call the poetics and politics of obsolescence. But the first now often goes by the name of artist cinema, and the second is called media archaeology. Yet in each case, the answer to the implied question my title, Cinema After Film, is, as I said, cinema after film is cinema before the film. Those of you who remember Tom Tykwer's Run Lola Run, or those who know German football, will recognize the immortal words of a famous national coach. Nach dem Spiel ist vor dem Spiel. After the game is before the game. Let me say a few more words about the art world. Why are so many contemporary artists not only utilizing moving image media, digital video camcorders, as well as high-end studio equipment, if we think of Bill Viola or Pipilotti wrist as their basic tools, but also deploy the history of the cinema as an art historical reference, much in the way that Picasso might have used Velázquez or Goya, or Anselm Kiefer used Rembrandt and Van Gogh. One answer to why the cinema has become an artist's reference point is the ready availability of so much movie history on the web and as DVDs, that there is now a general sense of ownership of the cinema. As part of culture, it belongs to everybody. Now, in the art world, however, this sense of ownership, as already hinted at, is also based on an enhanced self-confidence as patrons, on behalf of the public and the nation. Big institutions like Tate Modern, the Pompidou Center, or the Whitney in New York began making big claims in this respect. I already referred to those, and they usually have the power, the legitimacy, and the money to enforce these claims. These museums have essentially acquired or appropriated not only the cinematic avant-garde, but the cinema as cinema. Not only by expanding their collections, but by being able to commission the new work I mentioned. The career of an artist I have followed for at least 40 years, namely Howard Farocki, is exemplary in this respect. Let me just... This is from his Schnittstelle, his first installation work. He moved from being Germany's best-known unknown filmmaker to internationally acclaimed installation artist in the space of almost less than a decade. Here is one of the banks of monitors that actually shows a film called Workers Leaving the Factory, an homage to the Lumieres. Other avant-garde filmmakers who in the 70s have shunned the museum have been remaking their work in order to fit into the museum formats and into the new digital format. Examples being Michael Snow, whose most famous work was Wavelength, but here you'll have wavelength for those who don't have the time. So now wavelength has been acclaimed as a classic avant-garde filmmaking since its appearance in 1967. In February 2003, Snow created a new work consisting of simultaneity rather than sequential progressions of the original work. WVLNT is composed now of 3 unaltered superimpositions of sound and picture. Originally 45 minutes, now 15. Exclamation mark. And similarly, sorry, this is the original one. Here it's actually now advertised as part of Atopia's celluloid project. We are pleased to present Michael Snow's, etc., in the original 16mm format at the Cinematheque, but very much in the film and video art museum context here in Norway. The same is happening to Ken Jacobs, who endlessly remakes his Star Spangled Banner here, Star Spangled to Death, 1957 to 2004. The new sense of ownership of the cinema by the art world and gallery spaces is not unconnected with the already mentioned death of cinema, except that the occasion was the cinema centenary. Maybe this is a word of relevance here for the Golden Jubilee as well, which launched the first frontal assertion of the new ownership. Celebrating 100 years of the Lumiere brothers' inventions in 1995 became the ideal occasion to praise the cinema in order to bury it. The success of a number of ambitious, large-scale exhibitions by major art institutions since the mid-90s, such as Hall of Mirrors at the MoCA in Los Angeles, Spellbound at the Hayward Gallery in London, Into the Light at the Whitney in New York, X-Screen at MUMOC in Vienna, Le Mouvement des Images at the Centre Pompidou in Paris, or the Cinema Effect, Illusion, Reality and the Moving Image at the Hirshhorn Gallery, Smithsonian in Washington, all help to promote the notion that the proper place for the history of the cinema is now the museum. And I want to show you a very brief, but I have to make a brief extract from the Hirshhorn's own promotional video of its exhibition.
Cinema is everywhere now. It's on your iPod, it's on buildings, it's on television, it's on your computer. You can download it and have it on your cell phone. We wanted to investigate the idea of film and video as it's being used by contemporary artists today. We decided some time back to really take a look at what had been happening with moving image technology in the art world and the artists who've been very interested in using this technology.
For many years, the museum did not acquire photography, film, or video, but that's now shifted, and we, in the last several years, have been making a concerted effort to both present that work, which the Cinema Effect exhibitions are clearly an indication of our commitment to it, and acquire that work into the collection. I very much believe that artists working in film and video are as sophisticated and knowledgeable about the history of art and the history of their medium as artists working in any other medium.
Cinema has blurred the distinction between illusion and reality, so the first part of this two-part exhibition dealt with dreams. The second part deals with realisms, things that look more like the documentary. But in fact, both parts meet in the middle.
The show broadly looks at sort of the confusion of fiction and reality in cinema and sort of in our contemporary world.
What law is it that says that a woman is a better count?
It quotes and sort of appropriates from mainstream film, and not only American film, Hollywood film, but also film made in the UK and in Italy, and also Bollywood film from India.
You see, the word appropriation is actually pronounced. So there's this assumption that there's a natural fit between the gallery space and the cinema effect. However, the discourse of the Curators, I've only given you a very small extract, also addresses a host of contradictions which hint that not only film historians realize that matters are far more complicated when the moving image enters the museum. One is in fact reminded of a dictum by Boris Groys, who argued that today's art is not made by artists but by curators. Because in order to decide what is art, you have to be in control of the space where it appears, you have to be in control of the institution that guarantees its authenticity, and you have to be in control of the discourses that legitimate it. It is a lesson that artists have also taken to heart, and the sense of ownership I just mentioned also extends to artists, many of whom see themselves as curators, not least as curators of the cinematic archive, a stance that is implicit in the idea of an artist's cinema. The French actually call it cinéma d'exposition, which refers to artists' use of cinema in their work, whether recycling or reworking classics, as I showed you some examples. Notably, the work of Hitchcock has actually been explored, examined, reappropriated, reworked by, I think I counted 18 artists in the last 15 years, or delving into the archive for found footage. But it also includes making full-length films, as in the case of Sam Taylor Wood, who made Nowhere Boy, Douglas Gordon, who made Zinedine Zidane, and especially Steve McQueen, who now has just shown his third film after Hunger and Shame, 12 Years as a Slave. On the other hand, among this younger generation of artists, grew up with both cinema and television, the claim to ownership of the cinema in and for the space of the museum articulates itself also on somewhat different grounds. It manifests itself, for instance, as genuine love of the movies of their youth, tied to their own cinema-going experience. Again, often celebrating cinema history more than film history, which is another reason I want to talk about cinema after film as being possibly also cinema before film. Or they remember daytime soaps, late-night television screens of B-picture horror flicks, or 1940s thrillers. In other words, a different kind of cinephilia is present in the films and installations of Douglas Gordon, Cassidy Dean, Isaac Julian, or Gordon Douglas, from that, which I grew up, namely the Cahiers du Cinéma, inspired auteurism that lionized Sam Fuller or Nicholas Ray, or remained staunch supporters of even the worst film by Edgar Ulmer and Alan Dwan. The auteur that seems the exception to this rule is, as I've mentioned, Hitchcock. But he is treated, as I try to indicate, as common property, or he simply stands for Hollywood tout court. This artist cinephilia thus no longer shuns Hollywood or makes distinctions between high culture and popular culture. It raids the icebox, it plunders the archive, it makes even well-known classics anonymous and turns them into fragments. It celebrates the cinema in the form of found footage compilations. When planning an exhibition called Ingmar Bergman at the museum, I did such a compilation myself, together with a research assistant and a young editor. It's now on YouTube gathering hits, but it was never shown publicly because of rights issues. If I may, I'll show you just a brief extract of that. This was very much in the context of what Ravi referred to as my film theory through the senses as well. Although, therefore, the sense of ownership of the cinema on the part of artists and the sense of ownership on the part of contemporary museums, sorry, I should take us back to my the sense of ownership on the part of the artist and the sense of ownership on the part of the museum show some significant differences. I'm nonetheless tempted to use for both the term the aesthetics of obsolescence and make nonetheless a distinction between the museum's politics of obsolescence and the artist's poetics of obsolescence. By obsolescence, I'm not only referring to the now obligatory presence of the whirring sounds of a 16mm projector or the regular clapping of a carousel slide projector that we come across so often. Many a gallery or one-woman show here, Rosa Barber, The Future Lasts One Day, 5 projectors arranged like a chorus, nor of such exquisite mise-en-scène of obsolete technologies as Rodney Graham's Rheinmetall Victoria, that I want to, again, very briefly show you an extract, especially since it appears on the poster for this lecture. You see how important the flicker effect is and the whirring sound in this installation. It's primarily photographing an object, an obsolete, now obsolete typewriter. It both dematerializes the object and rematerializes in another register. I'll keep it a little bit short, but I'll show you two frames from it. It does have a certain progression because at a certain point snow starts falling on the typewriter, so eventually it's covered with snow, which is another way of both reminding us of, if you like, the filmic substance, but also indicating a certain, I mentioned dematerialization, but also a certain pixelization of the image. So there he uses very evidently an old style projector and a manual typewriter, but very much within the digital realm, and he calls it two obsolete technologies facing off. But obsolescence goes deeper and seems in many ways the overarching concept under whose broad etymological expanse the appropriation of the cinema can proceed almost without a hitch. When we look at the dictionary, we find the word obsolete has several meanings. No longer used or practiced, worn away, dilapidated, indistinct, hardly perceptible, and as a noun, a thing which is out of date and has fallen into disuse. What is crucial for my purposes is that in each of its usages, present and past are both integral and palpable. They are, in this sense, joined, and I would say that obsolescence functions like a temporal loop. It ensures that reflection on the no longer useful also reveals a lost promise, and vice versa. The present moment, cognizant of its ephemerality, looks at past obsolescence as if into the mirror of its own future. While the museum might seize the opportunity to use obsolescence to give nostalgia the dignity of guarding the archive, and thus engages in the politics of obsolescence, the film, video, and digital artist can practice a kind of poetics of obsolescence, proactively deploying obsolete technologies in order to counter the ephemerality of any work that depends for its performance and presence and preservation on audiovisual hardware and digital software. Such work requires future curators turned archivists who catalogue it, store it, study it, and once more put it on display, now along with the restored and carefully maintained technology that is needed to show it. And I would argue, and this is one of my key insights from tonight, the digital here proves to be a threshold, thanks to which the obsolete can appear as the new because it is liberated from the context of its usefulness and its instrumentalization. I would say its failure to serve becomes its right to be. Its failure to serve becomes its right to be. More broadly speaking, the strategic use of obsolescence lies in the fact that being a term that inevitably associates both capitalism and technology, it is of special interest in the contemporary art world context because it implicitly acknowledges that today there is no art outside capitalism and technology. Technology, in turn, is the bridge from classical modernist art to the cinema, and thus tacitly acknowledges that the new will have to be found through the old, not against the old. This is also one of the underlying assumptions of media archaeology. At the heart of this process is the paradoxical cultural moment where to be retro is to be novel, where going vintage is being avant-garde. Obsolescence and progress have become the recto and verso of each other, and the fact that obsolescence can be the new is both a sign that the fashion system now fully pervades cultural production, and it uncovers a certain collusion that has existed all along of avant-garde art and capitalism around creative destruction. This would confirm an institutional politics of obsolescence, yet in another sense, while still leaving room for an artistic poetics of obsolescence, both held together by the intricate semantics of obsolescence that I was only able to touch on. Such a poetics goes back to Walter Benjamin's reflections on surrealism, where he argues for the reclaiming for art the discarded, the ephemeral, and the newly useless. But such a semantics of obsolescence also returns us to the implications of Marshall McLuhan's tetrad of media effects, which, with its four questions: what does the medium enhance? What does the medium make obsolete? What does the medium retrieve that has been discarded earlier? And what does the medium flip into when pushed to extremes? This tetrad of media effects, which specifies the conditions and operations of any forms of media change or media transfer, surprisingly links McLuhan to Claude Lévi-Strauss, to A.G. Greimas and Frederick Jameson, key figures in structuralism, semiotics, and postmodernism. Or because all were examining the spatial logics of narratives, I come back to what I said about the shifting parameters of narrative, all examining the spatial logic of narrative with their famous semantic square, which has played such an important part in film theory, cinematic apparatus, but also in literature. But McLuhan's tetrad can also be seen as one of the intellectual sources and resources of media archaeology in the field of cinema history, which I will simply now allude to by giving you a very brief rundown. Because over the same past 2 or 3 decades that saw the rise of artist cinema and the theory of the cinematic apparatus, film historians have also devoted themselves to the condition, dynamics, and consequences of this rapid media transfer and transformation. Under the various labels of early cinema, which I had a hand in, the cinema of attractions and media archaeology, scholars focus on 2 such relatively abrupt periods of transformation taking place across a broad spectrum of media technologies and social developments. The period from 1870 to 1900 and the period from 1970 to 2000. The first witnessed the popularization of photography, the emergence of cinema, the international transatlantic use of the telegraph, and the domestic use of the telephone, the invention of radio and of the theories as well as the basic technologies of television. While the second saw the consolidation of video as a popular storage medium, as well as an avant-garde practice, the rise of installation art and its hybridization with cinema, the universal adoption of the personal computers, the change from analog to digital sound and image, the invention of the mobile phone and the emergence of the internet and the World Wide Web. So scholars are taking these 2 periods as ways of bouncing off more theoretical and historical models of media change. The lesson to retain, perhaps, from the contradictory convergence of avant-garde cinema, apparatus theory, and artist cinema and media archaeology is perhaps the following. In order to understand the complex relations that bring different media together into what now appears to be interdependent networks, such as in this case, my case, the art world and cinema, it is unhelpful to base oneself primarily on a given technology, be it photographically based film or be it digital. The lessons that the Poetics of Obsolescence give is not only that the old can be the new and that linear progress in either the arts or in the media is an illusion, but also that a given media technology might be culturally most productive where it is experienced as failure-prone or obsolete. This would be a system theories approach indebted, in my case, to Niklas Luhmann's idea of an irritant, Störfaktor he calls it, and he claims that an irritant, a Störfaktor, can actually act as a stabilizing or even energizing element in a given system. In an installation called Deliverance, this is my last example, Matt Collishaw reinvents cinematic projection in order to talk about television and in order to talk about the media's need for images of disaster. Collishaw uses photographs of disasters, both human and natural, and projects them on a screen, but one that reacts more like a cathode ray tube, in that it is covered in fluorescent paint to alter both its intensity and its temporality.
The first idea I got for the show was a picture I'd seen from Beslan, which is like 3 or 4 years ago, and I knew those images were quite strong and for me quite potent because the media had quite a lot of time to set themselves up there, so you got action unfolding as it happened. But also because the kids have been trapped in the gym and they're all in underpants, there was a lot of flesh, which kind of made it more disturbing, and also made it a little bit more timeless because you didn't have Nike trainers and jeans as a reference point for fashion. And I found out that you could project images onto this phosphorescent paint. When the projection moved away, the images will still be retained on the wall. The light would actually burn itself into the pigment. And to me, that was something like what happens with images that flash up in your mind, and the residue of them is left in your brain as you think about them, and then gradually they just fade from your memory. And there's something for me that was quite sad about that, and quite dramatic the way it hit your retina and then went into your brain, and then was something that slowly dissipated and left. But also in the newspapers every day, which I read a lot of, and the internet on TV, they're constantly coming at you these images. It might not be an image of a terrorist incident like in Beslan, it could be somebody's gas cooker that's exploded, or like an earthquake situation, or a bomb in Bali, but there's consistently this barrage of images of people in disaster situations, people fleeing situations and running from the barrel of a gun into the barrel of a camera or whatever. So although it's upsetting, I think it kind of makes us feel more alive to experience images like that.
Therefore, would be to regard the obsolescence of cinema as a historically distinct dispositif of heterogeneous technologies and spaces, projector, screen, racked auditorium, yielding a distinct experience, immersed in the dark, yet wide awake, isolated and singular, yet communal and collective, as just such a Störfaktor or irritant, and this both in the art world context I briefly characterized and in the digital environment about which I haven't said much tonight. Being an irritant, that is, carrying its historical baggage, but with the allure of nostalgia and obsolescence, it paradoxically functions as a stabilizing force, or even as an energizer and a counter-practice amid the expanded field of the media interactions and interdependencies, such as they exist in the Episteme 2000, that is the period 1970 to today. With regard to the cinema after film, it would mean not only attending to the constitutive parts of the classic apparatus, which I just named, but also identifying their functional equivalents across a range of media technologies and practices, the gains and losses of density of storage versus ease of access and various other calculations of gains and loss that media transfers and change imply. This would be the methodological implication of speaking of media archaeology in the context of what might be called the tactical alliance of media practices united, as I suggested, essentially in antagonistic cooperation, rather than talk, as is usually the case, of media convergence. So, instead of thinking of it a kind of wholesale transfer of transition into the properties of one singular technology, with everything becoming digital, nor turning everything into distinct practices, my sense would be that obsolescence as such an irritant, could be the conceptual component in a possible alliance between history and aesthetics, in that it creates a non-linear relay between two realms too often seen as incompatible or heteronymous. Let me end on another word from Walter Benjamin, citing a famous phrase from Karl Marx to the effect that revolutions are the locomotives of history. Benjamin countered that revolutions are also the emergency brakes on this locomotion of history. Cinema after film is cinema before film, could also be, my thesis could also be understood in this sense. The digital revolution, where, as far as movies are concerned, everything stays the same, has stayed the same, and everything has changed, could also be providing the emergency brake, and this emergency brake I have called obsolescence. It gives us time and space to pause, and perhaps I can wish the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, best way of wishing it a happy anniversary is to suggest that it too might devote some of its vast energies, as we've heard, to the future of obsolescence, in a world that needs sustainability at least as much as the next radical break. Thank you very much.